This is Progress Canada, presented by Lightbulb Narrative. Today we're joined by Newmarket, Ontario Mayor John Taylor. Thanks so much for joining me, John.
That's great to be here.
Okay, so before we get into, your current role that you hold, I want to talk a little bit about your background. Before you put your own name on a ballot, you actually were involved in politics. I happen to know your former boss. We've been working together over the last year. But I'm wondering, how did you first get involved in politics? What launched your, political career at Queen's Park, and what initially, drew you to public service in the first place?
Yeah, I mean, I think it would be, it's obviously it has to do something to do with my father's role. So I mean, my father was on Newmarket Town Council when I was born. So I was literally born into it, I guess, if you could say that. I don't like that phrase, but you know what I mean. And so I mean, I've been around that. Like, my father was first elected, I think, to town council in 1962, and eventually retired in 2006 as mayor. And so it's just a normal part of life. Like, I see that, I witness it as, when you think about when people when they want to make a difference, when they want to make change, when they want to have impact, they often look to examples around them. Oh, my mother was a teacher, or my father was a teacher, or my uncle was a priest, or my sister started out in social work and had a big impact. So the example for me that I could see readily all the time was that you can make change and you can have impact by being elected and trying to bring good things forward.
Well, sort of off topic already, which I do a lot of, but what was your father's introduction to politics? Because I remember growing back up in Newmarket, of course, and I remember having a Tom Taylor pencil from his campaign. So, he's always been part of my memory of politics as well. Do you know what his origin was?
Well, I think there's a few things. He was just very involved, and it was a very small community then. But there's one good story. It's an accurate story, but he often talks about it sometimes when asked, and that was that the office specialty at that time, which is now the specialty lofts. My grandfather worked there for many years, and it was exuding really, really impactful smoke and grit. And it was to the point where it was like landing on people's laundry, on their laundry lines, and it was dirtying, and it was in the pollution. So he decided he was going to sort of try to push back on that and get some change there, and that led to running for council. But back then, remember, council terms, for people's context, and back in the 60s and early 70s was 1 year, and it was basically a volunteer role, and you kind of just did it. So it was a very different world then, but that's the story was that he almost put his father out of work.
I was going to say, I was looking back at mayoral history in Newmarket, and I think he was the second long-term mayor, because to your point, everyone served about a year before then. And there's quite a few. If you had pictures of them all on the wall, there'd be quite a few because of that. Yeah. I am interested. Would his campaigns have been your first campaign then? And how did you make that transition to Queen's Park?
Yeah, I mean, I can remember working on campaigns for him at fairly young, and licking stamps. And I've got photos of my kids when they were now 6 or 7 putting signs together now, and they're going to university or in university. So I guess what goes around comes around. And but yeah, and then eventually I was sort of in between things. I'd finished my first degree, and I was wondering what to do. And Charles Beer, who's lived in town forever and still does, was looking. He'd just been appointed to cabinet, Minister of Community Social Services and Francophone Affairs, and he was looking for a driver/assistant. And so he mentioned it to my father, and I went and saw him, and I said, well, do I have to get my hair cut? And he said, no. And I said, I'll take the job. So it was that was a great first step into the real world of politics, as opposed to volunteering, et cetera, because it was a political office. And Charles was and is a great mentor, a great role model for anybody in elected office. And we can talk about that sometime later, but I think the nature of people, why they're there, the values and ethics they bring to government, it's changed a lot, and we need a lot more Charles Beer and frankly Tom Taylor back in politics and back in government. And I think that's a change we can talk about needing to see. But yeah, Charles really just taught me about hard work, humility, and getting things done.
I do want to talk about those two examples because when I think of people who run for office, there are a number of them who are former political staffers, of course. And I think there are different types of political staffers who become different types of politicians as well. Some of them, I think they're just very used to the political world and it seems like the next step. Some of them, I think, see what that service is like, see what that life is like, and decide, despite the challenges of that life, I know I can make a difference, XYZ, in a way that I probably can't make in any other aspect of public life. What did you learn from, watching your dad serve as mayor for almost a decade, watching Charles serve as a minister in a portfolio that had some pretty tough situations for, again, he was working on issues around poverty and things like that were really, really tough for people on the ground. What did you learn from watching them as politicians, and why did that spark your interest to say, yes, I want to raise my hand and become one myself as well?
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, I think I had two great examples in various ways, and I could speak to some of those things that I still hope I try to embody today. So I think part of it, a big one for me is humility. Like, I've been doing this a lot. When I started 20 years ago, I was one of the young people in the room, and now I'm not one of the young people in the room. But I've been doing this long enough and seen enough people come and go at different levels of government, because I work beside people of different parties and at different levels of government, throughout 20 years as a deputy mayor and mayor. And, you see that most people come in with a fair bit of humility because they've just had to go knock on doors and ask people, and not all, but most. But it's really, I've found it interesting to see quite a significant number, maybe even as high as 50% in very short order, all of a sudden go, wow, I'm important. I'm an important person. And I get it. Like, I can tell you, for people who have no exposure into the world of being a politician, and particularly ironically being a mayor, is you're treated like you're very important every day. And it actually takes active resistance to not buy into that. So I think that example of humility, always remembering you're just a person doing a job. Everybody's got a job to do. The other one I think really is that it's not enough to give nice speeches and have press releases and debate. It's about getting things done, and that's about improving people's lives. And if you always remind yourself and ask yourself, so what have I done lately? What have I achieved? What's changed that's improving people's lives, that is making the community better, as opposed to how many likes I have on Facebook. I think you do the job a little differently too.
For sure. I've always thought of public service as one, I think you should leave it in the way that you came to it, not in the sense of not changing by circumstances and the people you encounter, all that stuff. I mean by the values you came in with. Hopefully you leave with the same values and have not been chained by the process and all the adulation that people give you because you're a so-called important person. But I also think you're right that it has to be about who you're trying to help. And I think there are people who get into politics who think, well, I'm running to be an important person, and I don't think that's the point of public service. It's kind of in the name that you're there to serve the public, and the more that you can remember that that's what it's about, I think the better work you will probably do. I want to talk about your service prior to becoming mayor. You were a regional councillor for 12 years, which is a very long time. And I think, not everybody in Ontario or even Canada would understand necessarily what the heck a regional councillor does. Can you talk a little bit about that role and what regional government kind of looks like?
So the simplest way I can explain it first is that many areas across the country have county or regional government. Some don't. And then obviously people from larger population centers don't understand that as well, because they're in what, and they don't often realize, but what they're in is a single tier city. Or so Toronto's a single tier city, and all services are provided at that tier because there's enough density and there's enough yeah, people in concentrate in one area to justify and make sense of that being delivered that way. Really, regional government was an attempt to find efficiencies and to provide services better on a regional level. And so, in where we live and where many people live, whether it's regional or county, that's a second level of municipal government. All it is two levels where you split the services. So in the case of York Region, at the regional level, we're dealing with York Regional Police, obviously. We're dealing with what I like to call the big pipes, water, wastewater big pipes that sort of wholesale stuff into the retail pipes in smaller centers like Newmarket. You're dealing with EMS. You're dealing with all the human services, right? Like housing, social services, all kinds of different supports, homelessness supports, etc. So there's a whole array of service at that level. Lower tier, we're still in the recreation, parks, events, roads, and snow plowing, that kind of level sphere of responsibility.
Yeah, it's really interesting when you look at it from different angles. So of course, I grew up in Newmarket, where you go down Yonge Street and the communities are pretty connected. Like you sort of drive from one to the other, and it's sometimes hard to tell the difference between them. But I was also born in Moose Factory, Ontario. So, you've got your Cochrane district stuff happening there, and it's a very wide swath of land that they're covering. So I think you can see a little easier why the regional level of government or the county level of government is helpful at that level. But it does play a big role in Newmarket. Again, you're the heart of the region. You're in the center of it. You've got a regional hospital. You've got all these kinds of things that service the whole area. So it's an interesting thing that, again, I live in Toronto right now, and we talk about the neighborhood. So you have Scarborough, you have Etobicoke, and it's sort of similar, but it really is a bit of a different environment on the ground.
One thing I would say too, and for people who are listening from other jurisdictions trying to get a read on, like York Region, you sit there as a regional councillor or a deputy mayor so there's 21 of us, regional councillors or mayors from 9 municipalities. But you're talking, I often talk to people and say that, it's kind of big government. It's approaching the size of some of the small provinces. It's 1.3 million people. It's got a budget of close to $5 billion. It's got a GDP the size of some of the small provinces. So it's a big entity, a big machine. With a lot of moving parts and a lot of complexity to it. So it really does take a lot of your time and energy and attention to do the job properly at that level alone.
I think it's a great point, because I think people outside of the GTA tend to forget of how big the GTA is in terms of population. We may not be a huge footprint, but in terms of population, again, as you're saying, it's over pretty much all but, I would think, 2 or 3 other provinces in terms of size. So it is an enormous bunch of people that you're trying to govern on behalf of and make good decisions for.
Have it back to your questions about sort of what makes you think and motivate and how to approach the job, and connect it to something you just said that I think you'll find fun and interesting. And you may know, I don't know, but I don't think you do know this. So the other big impact on me in terms of how I view my job and how I do my job is that I spent a number of years in education, and 5 of those years teaching on reserve in Manitoba. I ended up there because I took a course at university where I did a 1-week placement at a public school in Moose Factory.
What?
Yeah, and one of the reasons I did my placement there was because my parents met in Moose Factory. That's where they actually met.
I never knew that. So when were they there, and when were you there?
They would have been there around 1955. And I was there probably around 95, maybe, no, before that, not 88, 89, 90 in there.
Okay, interesting. My parents, so my dad's a teacher, and that's why we ended up in Moose Factory around that time, because of course teaching jobs were, there was a shortage of them, which is, a cyclical process that happens. But we were there I think my parents were there from 81 to 88. So we would have, ships passing in the night with you there.
Yeah, possibly. And the reason I also raised that and I was connecting it back is it really, I lived on reserve in Pegwis, Manitoba, for 4 years there, and it really did sort of bring home some of the difficulties and challenges people face, that sometimes in what is frankly a privileged lifestyle that many of us lead, and a place of privilege that we don't see up close, and then to also see the impact of the absence of service or the introductions of services and supports and how big a difference it can make in lives, in children's lives, and people's lives. So wanting to sort of bring a bit of an equity lens to what I do, and understanding that I don't bring it because it's some sort of small politics. It's about understanding that there are people who have been so systemically disadvantaged for so long that we need to do something better and differently. And that's true even in our own communities here in Newmarket. That's just as true. And I think I see it better and more clearly for those experiences.
Not to veer off, my planned questions again so early, but I am interested in that sort of life education and also your formal education as well, because you, I believe, have a PhD and you've done a lot of training in education itself. How important has both of those backgrounds been to how you approach politics in general?
A lot. So definitely, it brought first that sort of understanding around what equity looks like and what a lack of equity looks like, and the sort of some of the potential buttons and levers and policies that maybe one can start to think about to address those kinds of things was something I had a lot of time the luxury of time to spend, to think about and to understand, and to observe through experience and time in place and learning. For example, I did a year of my master's degree in Canadian Studies and Education. I did a year of that at the University of Chiang Mai, studying the state delivery of education in the hill tribes areas of Thailand. Again, seeing sort of what, frankly, first of all, extreme poverty looks like, and what some interventions could do and the difference it could make. The other thing I would say, actually, and I've joked about this, and is like, I went through all this time. I was in university for 11 or 12 years, did 4 degrees, got a doctorate, and then went into politics. And people are saying, wow, you did all that and then you went into politics?
What a waste.
Yeah, well, that's what it sounds like to people. What a waste. But the irony is, looking back, the average regional agenda is 400 to 600 pages a month, with 20 to 40 reports, and they're detailed, complex reports on latest technologies in waste management, or some examples out of Europe about housing and housing first, and dealing with people experiencing homelessness and supporting them. And you're all over the map, and then stuff on policing and different types of interventions and supports and mental health, and so ironically, maybe one of the best preparations was doing a master's and a PhD. I do believe I have an ability now, because of that, to synthesize a lot of information, make sense of it, and ask the relevant questions that need to be asked. And so it really was a great training for what we do now, which a lot of people don't realize how much of it is information, paper based, and really just requires you to sort of take a lot in and hopefully make some sense of it.
I jest, but I have a philosophy degree, so I feel very much the same way, that some of the best education you can get is the education that teaches you to think critically and to really dive into issues, and to not just, jump to conclusions and things like that. So I can see how your education would have been very useful in your career up to this point. I do want to talk about the transition to mayor. So you ran in 2018 for mayor, and I've looked at the AMO data on when first-time candidates are running. You're not a first-time candidate in that sense, but for this position, and how unlikely it is to become an elected person in a role that you run for the first time. But you got 73% of the vote. And then the next time you ran in 2022, you ran unopposed. I suspect because you were so popular, people thought, what the heck's the point of running against him? Or maybe even, hey, he's doing such a great job, why would we run against him? Why do you think you've gotten such high marks from voters so far?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I had a teenage boy at a talk I did recently for some students, asked me, so do you think you would have got elected if it wasn't for your dad? And I said to him, good for you for being bold enough to ask that question, and so I'll start there and say, I'm not naive enough, and I understand the issues, and you talk about recognizing privilege, right, and recognizing your own place of, and so I came with that advantage of a father who had been a mayor and was very well, I think maybe even loved, and still is. So I don't want to discount that too much. But I think by then I'd done 12 years as regional councillor, deputy mayor, and at this point, a good chunk of, if not half, the community knows me only as me, and not as the son of Tom Taylor. And so I think I really demonstrated in those 12 years, a lot of hard work, a lot of follow through, a lot of acumen. I believe, and that's another area we talk about that. But I mean, anybody still to this day that contacts my office will talk to me or hear from me within 24 hours from me. It's getting harder and harder to do, and I don't know if that's sustainable for forever. But and follow through isn't just getting back to people; it's getting back to them 2 or 3 or 4 times until you've either explained to them that what they're seeking is not achievable or not reasonable, or you get back to them and you explain that we simply don't have the power, the authority at the municipal level, or you get back to them, and often this is the case, and say, you know what, you're right. We've looked into this and we're going to start making some changes and we're going to address that. And this is how we're going to do it. So follow through is real follow through. But so I think that's part of it. And I think that's, now that we're, I was acclaimed last time. So far, I have no opponent at this point. Newmarket is, and I'll say this, and people can assume it's partially biased, and they can do some research, and I think they'd find it's quite a bit true, is that Newmarket's doing exceptionally well right now, and I think people recognize that when you go in the street and talk to people. I just put a little picture of myself with my papers and said I finally got around to filing and I'm running again, and the response was to be very blunt, overwhelming. It was quite something, and so in the comments were people are very, very happy with where the town's at and where it's going. Not every single person and not every single issue, and there are areas of challenge yet and things I know we have to do better at next term, but overall we're doing quite well as a community.
Before we get into how Newmarket's doing, I do want to touch on that point you've made about responsiveness, because I've been in politics for a long time. I unfortunately live with my phone in my hand, attached to it permanently most of the time, and that's probably not healthy. But I do think with everything going on in the world and all the different directions people are being pulled in, responsiveness is one of the things that drops off pretty quickly for some people. And that can be problematic, especially at the municipal level. You are so close to the services that people need that you do need to be able to respond very quickly to things. How important do you think that has been to your success? Because to me, again, I think when I look at, I'm a comms person, so when I look at people looking at issues that come up, the instinct for political people, for most people, is to just go, ooh, I don't want to deal with that. Let me spend some time thinking about it. And it's great to pause and actually come up with a great response. But I think what people fail to do in the immediate term is say, hey, let me get back to you on that. They just fill it with silence, this need that people have for, a response on things. Like you said, you usually respond within 24 hours. So that doesn't seem to be your response. Even if you can't solve the problem right away, is that the key part of it? Letting people know you're there and then working the problem? I
think it's a key part of it, but I think honestly, the bigger part is the follow through, is to actually, write them back, say, I'm looking into it. And sometimes I'll respond to somebody and sort of say, this is what I found. That I'll sometimes, that's kind of done now. I've responded and said, this is what I'm able to do. This is what we can't do. This is why. And there'll be thanks for looking into it. And then I'll discover something new a month or two later, and I'll go back to them again. And people genuinely appreciate that. And it goes back to your really questions about other levels of government and having worked at Queen's Park. The other thing I learned to know deeply is that, and there's different ways of putting this. People always say, well, municipal is the closest to the people. The other one is that I really do think that provincial and federally, people are pretty elected officials and the issues are pretty removed from people. And this immediacy, first of all, I love it. But it's so important. I mean, I go on Facebook all the time and have conversations. In the middle of it, I'll just jump in and say, well, hang on a second, that's not quite accurate. But that point you're raising is a very good one. And what we could look into is this. And that kind of authentic, straightforward communication on a continuous basis, I think, is a very powerful thing. So I do think that's a big part of things. But I think it's not just the filling the silence. I see lots of people in politics who communicate a lot, but really don't say much. And people figure that out with time. And what they want is they want you to say something, and they want you to respond for real, and they want you to follow up and get action.
I think that's such an important point because, as somebody who writes messaging, sometimes I'm very good at writing something that says absolutely nothing, but that's not why we're here. We are here to actually achieve things for people and to explain things to them, in a way that they can accept and move on, or, get what they need. And I will say, I've seen a few of your responses online, and a lot of times, like, sometimes there are politicians who are just very online and too online, and that's not what you're doing. You actually are coming on and explaining, sometimes bluntly, I think just clearly to people, like, what is actually going on. There was a flare up recently with you and another mayoral candidate in a different town, and you came charging right in and said, well, here's actually the case, and you explained all these things to the voters in your community, and you seem pretty fired up to me. But
I was a little fired up on that one, actually. That was rare for me. I even said that to somebody. I said, I was a little fired up on that one. It's because there's also to be blunt, there's some political etiquette about, and we all know it in politics, about where you respect the boundaries, and I've spoken with this person since then. I spoke to the person today, even good person, but was maybe just getting a little too excited about a campaign, and in my opinion, overstepped a little.
Sure. And I mean, I guess, I know him as well. We've worked together quite a bit, and there are worse things than getting excited about the political process and trying to make change. So we can forgive that, I guess. Right. But yeah, I found your communication style really refreshing, because it is immediate, it is clear, and it is, I will say, no bullshit as well. Like, you seem, more than a lot of politicians, really willing to engage with people on a really truthful, fact-based perspective, as opposed to just trying to give them a line to make them go away, which I think is, something we need more of, quite frankly.
Yeah, that's for sure.
So I want to talk a little bit about how the town of Newmarket is doing. So as mayor, you did your launch a statement of saying, I'm running for office, and in it you mentioned that you've cut the town debt in half, doubled reserves, kept taxes below the GTA average, and I see everything that's happening in the town, and I would say you're doing those things without actually sacrificing investment that leads to growth and a better quality of life in the town. So in your opinion, what's the key to balancing community investment with affordability for taxpayers?
Yeah, it's always one of the great challenges, and budgets are one of the great challenges of the year, and they pretty much take the entire year, and I'm in meetings about it constantly. I think that there's a few things here, and I've learned along the way, and one of them is that you've got to balance those things. And so I've always got to work to make sure the tax increases aren't too great. But I've said many times in speeches, and I do my annual addresses to the chamber and all these things. I speak just the way I do on Facebook at those. I'm very straightforward, and I said, and I'll often say to people, look, we can fix anything you want. We can build anything you want. It's your money. We're spending your money, right? So you want, I can build you anything, but it costs money, and we have to manage those finances. And all of the great things we want to do as elected officials, all of the problems we want to solve, all the facilities we want to build, can only be done on a sound financial footing. And so at the end of the day, I say to people, and I'm very clear about it, look, you don't want us to have the highest taxes in the province or the GTA. You don't want us to have the lowest either. If your taxes are the lowest, you're not building for the future. You're not building a great community. You're not investing in the future. If they're the highest, there's a good chance you're probably not managing things quite as well as you could, and you're not being fully respectful of the affordability issue and taxpayers, et cetera. And so, the key is to find a balance there, and to do that, there's a lot of pieces to the puzzle. You need a little bit of growth. You need a strong local economy. But I think one thing that Newmarket has going for it in this category, and this we'll get into now, was sort of like the fiscal sustainability issues around municipalities, but I have a great deal of concern for a lot of mid to small municipalities that are very geographically large. It's particularly with this sort of assault on the development charges, the assault on DCs, which you could get me really, really going about. I think it's been utterly misguided. It's been bought into by almost everybody, including major newspapers, that the answer to everything is cutting DCs, and it is not the answer. And we're going to see the price of doing this 10 and 15 and 20 years out in a significant way. But I'll pivot back to the reason I worry about those communities, because I always thought they had a tough financial model. Now with the DC deferrals and reductions, et cetera, their model is very challenged. Newmarket is, on the other hand, and people are often surprised to hear this, the fourth most densely populated place in Ontario.
It's a postage stamp, right? Like when
That's
I
why.
look at the map of Newmarket, like, and I remember this growing up, I'm like, where are you going to build? You got to build up because there's literally no more land. Like the last parcel of land was Mulock, right? So they
When
just
and here's the irony is when I started into this, and prior to starting into this, everybody thought that was our Achilles heel. How are you should annex, you got to grow, you got to move out. It is our superpower. It's that simple, and we've all learned this over the last 20 years. There's different reports and studies. Hemson did a great one in Ottawa looking at the geography of the Greater Ottawa area, where there's low density and sprawl versus high density, and where the DCs were not paying for themselves, or the property taxes were not covering it because of the nature of that model. And so Newmarket being very dense, it's basically it's Toronto, Mississauga, Brampton, then Newmarket. And again, as you pointed out, because our tiny geography gives us the potential, I should say, doesn't make us, but gives us the potential to be very financially efficient. I would only say financially efficient to just survive and maybe thrive a little, because the municipal model is still so stressed and strained, even with a good, dense, model. But I worry about many other communities and that fiscal model. I worry that in 10 or 20 years, we're going to look back and go, that time when everything was getting cut and DCs were getting cut and funding was, and we were being asked to do way more in terms of housing or social services or homelessness. That's when this happened. That's when this started. And when you look and you see streets like we do sometimes in Ontario, or sidewalks or parks that you commonly see in the US, we're going to see more of that. And it's going to be a sad thing to witness.
when you were talking about density just now, I was thinking about, I think it was you. So when I come back at Christmas every year to go see my parents, we stay for a few days, and we stay at the hotel that's at the corner of Yonge and Davis. And I think it was you in the last year or so had posted a picture of the new tower that's going up there, and how you can literally see Lake Simcoe from Newmarket from this tower. And it really speaks to how not dense everything around Newmarket is, especially as you go north. And it does speak to what you're talking about, how with that limited land base that you have, you are able to get more for the services, I think, for that you provide to people. Yes. It's a very striking visual representation when I saw that photo that you took, because I was like, oh.
Yeah, and the other beauty of that is we're surrounded by Greenbelt, Oak Ridges Moraine, and York Region Forest System, which is immense, and so we also are very fortunate to be very dense, very urban, but be surrounded by sort of nature, green space, trails, and options. So it's a good balance. It's a good balance.
For sure. Yeah, I remember, going to hike in all those regional forests when I was a teenager. As soon as you got your licenses, you could go a little further afield than downtown, which was always nice. Prior to that, I was always on the Tom Taylor Trail, of course, because that was my local trail.
Very popular trail. Look, last thing I want to say on the fiscal side and that side of thing is that I also believe that while we're navigating a very difficult period for municipalities, the other part is I think that municipalities, cities have to be more entrepreneurial, have to think more creatively and ambitiously about their financial model. Where do we have opportunity to do things differently to increase non-tax based revenues? Can we set up municipal corps? Does our hydro utility offers opportunities? Are there partnerships with developers that can offer opportunities? And we've been doing quite a bit of that in the last 8 years. It really can offset some of the challenges in a significant way if you really sort of dig into that area.
Working with other levels of government is crucial for any municipality, because, as you said, municipalities are the level of government with the least funding coming into them. They don't have the same ability to raise tax revenue and other things to pay for maintenance and growth, which is part of why DCs existed in the first place. But I guess there's that part you're talking about, the entrepreneurial spirit. And I can't remember if Newmarket was working with Cambridge on hydro stuff. I know there's a few different municipalities in Ontario who've been looking at different models to get really, really good service for their people at a much better cost on some of these, primary things that people use day to day. But how have you leveraged the relationships with other levels of government? One, to ensure that Newmarket's getting its fair share of funding and services, but also, then leveraging that, I guess, to pursue some of these more creative solutions that you were just talking about.
Yeah, the creative solutions are really standalone. They're Newmarket centric. We've created them. We've created a municipal capital facilities agreement with a developer that is significantly funding some key projects in the town over a period of years, but also has allowed us to do some significant environmental things there. Every home is required to have a heat pump. Over 1,000 homes. There's 80 acres of green space being transferred over to us. There's a lot of there's 4.5 acres for affordable housing dedicated, and that all was part of that agreement. So we created a binding legal agreement with a very large development, the last one in Newmarket, to create some fiscal opportunities and support in a very difficult time. We also, at the same time, went through a process looking at our hydro utility and realized that we would have to put in significant amount of capital in the next, as all utilities will, in the next 10 to 30 years, which we don't necessarily have at our fingertips. And so we're able to create a 10-year sale/merge with Electra, on which our dividend will triple. So our ROI for those business people there will triple overnight. We'll avoid the capital call. But we'll also benefit from equity growth for at least a decade minimum. So a lot of those kinds of creative maneuverings around how we approach fiscal issues and opportunities, vis-a-vis development, vis-a-vis hydro utilities, and other things that we're working on. Then when it comes to the province, or both levels of government, the federal and the provincial government, I'll put my cards on the table. I'm just very disappointed with where we're at with that funding partnership aspect. I mean, any MPP or MP, if they were to hear this, could come and say, well, we got some money for that recreation program, and a lot of those things, the gas tax, they come every year. They're normal. This whole housing attempt to intervene in the housing market, in my opinion, is in the process of being a full and complete failure. And I will actually include the federal government in that as well, in previous programs and in the current program. They continue to try to, I think, strategically set up municipalities as the problem with housing. That way people won't look at the other levels of government as the problem for housing. And by doing so, we've taken our eye off the ball about what the real solutions are and what the bigger picture is. Now, some of that is getting well done through Build Canada Homes, but even this recent tranche of infrastructure funding that will be tied, to the current project, they don't necessarily align. Some cities and some big regions will have opportunity, but every one of that program itself that will provide infrastructure funding. That infrastructure funding we only get if we reduce by every dollar for dollar what we're collecting from development charges. So we're allowing developers, and it is developers, not home buyers, a big financial break. We're getting that money from another level of government, federal, provincial, and 10% of it has to come from us. So we're now 10%, at the very least, we're 10% less sustainable than we were. I could go on and on. The bottom line is that all of this work around housing is eroding the financial sustainability of municipalities, and I would argue there's little to no evidence that it's making any difference, that you can actually link those who get funding, and we have gotten virtually no funding. I'll remind you will know this, others may not. I'm one of the only mayors to not receive strong mayor powers because we didn't sign the housing pledge because it was unrealistic and it was unattainable, full stop. It wasn't even a stretch goal. So there we have it. We've got all of these interventions, and there's been 4 or 5 provincially over the last 3 years, 1 or 2 federally. There's no evidence. I mean, let's face it, the housing, at least in Ontario, it's still on life support. So none of it seems to have worked, but we've got a lot less financial sustainability at the lower tier municipal level.
I'm going to come back to strong mayor powers, but I actually worked in the Ministry of Housing under Minister Chris Ballard 10 years ago. I think it's almost 10 years ago now. And I can tell you then, I remember going back and forth with journalists, and they're like, oh, what are the issues on these things? And, in my head, it's like, well, we're not spending enough on this. Higher level governments are not getting as involved in this. We know that the federal government basically abstained from housing for 30, 40 years at this point, and we've made a lot of provincial policy choices in the last 10 years that have, to your point, led us in the wrong direction, quite frankly. I do want to talk about, you posted a little while ago about Newmarket's performance, despite not taking on these provincial housing pledges and the funding that comes with them. So in theory, not signing on to their program and not taking their money should have meant, abject failure for Newmarket, but that has not been the case. You had posted a table showing like the performances of all the communities in the GTA basically, and Newmarket was one of 3, I think, that got an A from the independent folks that were looking at this and saying, hey, who's actually doing a good job on getting housing built? What's Newmarket doing differently that is, bringing this positive change?
Well, you'll be surprised by my answer, but the answer is not much. We're not doing anything really differently, and it'd be disingenuous, to say the least of me, to take credit for this after I've been saying we can't dramatically influence this. We don't build houses. We don't play in the private market. Is there things that the government can do at all levels? Absolutely, and some of those are getting done. And even there are a few things at the provincial and federal level that I would argue, good policy moves. But at the end of the day, I think there's very little municipalities can do to influence the housing market, the private housing market, right? So now, some of the one area I think we can say we've done something in, which does influence those outcomes a bit, is in the affordable housing or non-market housing arena. We're very aggressive in that area. Right now, we have 2 shelter and transitional housing builds nearing completion simultaneously, and 2 very large 150 and 200 unit public housing builds. So one not-for-profit, one Housing York. I chair Housing York at the region, that are beginning in Newmarket. This is in Newmarket alone. 4 projects like that in a town of 100,000 is a lot, and there's more going on, and not just those. So we are building. So that's what I would argue. The levels of government should be focused on is non-market housing. We need to play a much bigger role. We know, compared to the G7, we have a very, very low number of non-market housing or subsidized housing. That's where we should be putting our effort at every level of government, and a few policy moves to try to support the market, the private market. But the private market has influences that are global playing at it, right? So and national, certainly. So that's my 2 cents on it. I think Newmarket does a good job, a very good job actually, at supporting and innovating and partnering in non-market housing, and so I'll take some credit. We'll take some credit for that piece of the puzzle, but the rest of it really isn't in our hands. And the sooner the provincial and federal governments realize that we can start focusing on policies that will make a difference.
I think it's an excellent point, bringing in the global picture, because this is something that, even 10 years ago, we saw starting to creep up. It really is a post-Great Recession reality that, one, we're having a cost of living crisis that never really recovered for most people, but specifically, my generation, I just turned 40, millennials have never really recovered economically from that, just as we're entering the housing market. And then we have this big financialization wave of housing that's truly global, as you mentioned. It's not something that is just about Ontario, just about Canada. It's something that is happening around the globe. And I wonder how concerned you are about that, because, I saw a news report this week that was saying, oh, this house in Etobicoke, this condo, it was a shoebox basically, this condo in Etobicoke just went for $250,000. I think that was the amount. I might be making that up, but around $250,000. And wow, is this a sign of like where the market's going? Well, if you read the actual article, this only happened because the owner of that property defaulted on their CMHC mortgage and they could not pay it, so it got taken over and then sold at a loss. So something I've been concerned about since the pandemic, where we had this mass buying frenzy that happened all over, usually it was the case of major centers like Toronto, but it spread out to other communities, even cottage country. I'm very concerned that now it's coming home to roost now. We are now getting to the end of those 5-year terms. Do you think there's going to be a lot of faulting on those mortgages? Are you concerned about that at all in your own community? Are you seeing that at all?
Yeah, there's some of it going on right now. I know of a couple of buildings where there's issues. One in particular. So yes, it's there. We're going to see it. It becomes part of the challenge. My understanding of it on a macro level is that the percentages that are anticipated aren't likely to destabilize housing writ large. But when you've got so many different types of challenges in housing and in the housing market, having another one coming on is a problem. This is an area where it's even when you talk about globally, it plays out differently. Even though there's global pressures, then there's local circumstances, like Canada with immigration numbers that were high and now are low. And so that you can look and find success stories, but you can look and find many other areas that are challenged. It's understanding the mix of global and then more national or local issues, and then finding the right formula, the solution. It's I have to say, I'm not sure there's anybody that really knows the answer, and everybody thinks they do, and will claim that if you just did this, if you just did that, but everybody's been doing a lot of those things, and let's face it, housing is more affordable than it was 3-4 years ago. It's down probably 20%. I see 3-bedroom condos in my town for sale now under 500,000. I never thought I'd see that in my lifetime again. And so that's occurred, but it's still very challenging from an affordability perspective because everything else is inflated as well, and getting first-time buyers into the market is difficult. And then you've got sort of all of that pressure around affordability, but because the prices have come down, nobody's building, which will create a lack of supply, which will drive prices back up again, and that's likely to occur in the next 2 or 3 years. Maybe not for 2 years, but so I look at this one and go, wow, I'd love to sit down with the 3 people smart enough to know the answer to this one, but I ain't one of them.
I do think it's interesting that, because people cite things like, housing prices down 20%, whatever it is. But I moved from Newmarket to Toronto 14 years ago now, and on the corner of my neighborhood, I won't say where because I don't like to tell people where I live on the internet. That's always just a basic safety thing. But the corner where I live, condos at that time were going for $400K. And so you're talking about Newmarket now, $500K. And again, this is, 45K out of kilometers outside of Toronto. And so we think of like how much it has shifted over that time and what that means for affordability for people, because their incomes have not risen accordingly to that. So, like this is a real struggle that people have. 20% less of unaffordable is still unaffordable. And I am wondering, in your community, have any projects fallen through over the last few years through this crisis? Because again, the block I live on, I had counted and there was 9 towers going up. A couple of those properties now are still just gravel, several years later. Some of them were delayed and now are going up. Only one of them is actually near finishing. So, these things do take a while to build. That is reality. We have labor laws, we have professional standards that we need to make sure housing is safe and all that. So it does take a while. But have you seen some of the projects in your community sort of fall out with what's been going on in the market, or have they been stable?
No, not stable. And there's different ways of falling out, right? What you've seen is some small to mid-sized developments nearing or at completion or past completion, but then all of a sudden go up in the marketplace for sale as is, sometimes not even completed. So they haven't fallen through yet, but they're definitely showing signs of strain and stress and risk. So you're seeing a bit of that. You're seeing some developments where they're trying to refinance. They're not closing on everything. People are walking away. So you're seeing some of that. I wouldn't say to a large or significant degree, but it's certainly you're seeing and feeling it. And there's some definitely, and it sends warning signs to the development industry. And while the development industry can sometimes be a part of the affordability challenge and problem itself, it's also a critical partner in getting supply and getting houses to market. And when they see people faltering, they see risk and they start to back off. And there's a lot of people developers sitting on the sidelines right now that are nervous about the conditions. And so, we're not seeing the housing being built, certainly not the more affordable housing being built that we need to see.
Do you support what we've seen from the federal government out in BC, specifically Vancouver, rescuing those projects and putting tax dollars to that? Or do you think that should be the private sector again figuring that out because it's their job to build housing?
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I remember seeing that, and I saw a lot of people jumping on it and saying, this is and major papers, what the government, they shouldn't be worrying about supporting developers. And well, who said they were? And my answer to that, and I heard one, I think it was Mike Moffat from Missy Middle being interviewed, and he said exactly what I've been thinking, which is it's a very simple answer. It's either a good idea or a bad idea, depending on the price. If the price, if we've looked at it here in York Region, Housing York. Again, I chair our housing corporation, and we build and et cetera. And we're looking at some distressed properties because not to help the developers, but if we can buy them for the same price or cheaper than we can build and bring them online in 6 months instead of 3 years, that's a good move. That's a good use of whatever limited funding you have at that time. So if upper levels of government want to go in and take distressed properties and not overpay for them, and not to support the developers, but to get housing quicker and more affordable than they could otherwise, then it's a perfectly good move to make. So until I see the and which I won't until I see the legal document and says what was paid under what conditions, what terms, I don't think anybody can say whether it was a good idea or a bad idea, but potentially a very good one.
I mean, there is also an argument that the sooner you fill those homes, the more improved tax base response you get from that as well. Like, yeah. It's much more useful having people living in those buildings than
well, not. But it's about achieving more. The reason they're doing these is to get non-market housing, to get subsidized housing, and so we governments do that. Like regional, we do that every year or two. We build a new building, so that's the business we're in. And if it's better achieved by buying an existing distressed property, we're not going into the private sector. We're doing what we already do. We're just doing it in a different way that hopefully is more efficient with the limited dollars we have. Right.
Yeah. At the risk of making us both rant, I do want to go back to strong mayor powers, and actually, a broader conversation about debates with higher levels of government. So, it isn't always smooth sailing when you're working with other levels of government. During your time in office, it's interesting to me, you got elected at the same time that Doug Ford became premier as well. So you've seen it up close for a number of years, for the entire time he has been in office. And when I look at what the Ford government has done to local decision making, there's lots of different examples. So there's doing away with elected regional chairs, which is probably something close to your heart in your past experience. Banning municipal speed cameras. I know that's something you've spoken about. Taking over school boards. I know one of the local school boards in York Region has been taken over as well. Creating, the so-called strong mayor powers, which for those who don't know, again, is the power to bypass local councils on, supposedly key issues like housing. But, the Toronto Star, which I think you were quoted in that article, actually, the Toronto Star did a big deep dive on whether it actually helped on housing, and turns out most of the time it's for petty little projects and actually wasn't directed at housing itself. So it was more of a power grab. Given all these things, and probably others that I'm forgetting at this moment, how do you think this is impacting local decision making? And what are your thoughts about the direction we're going in on that front?
Wow. Okay. Got another 45 minutes.
As long as you've got.
So yeah, it's there's a lot of problems. Let's start with strong mayor powers. I've said this a couple of times when asked in interviews. I believe that strong mayor powers at some point in the next 2, 3, 5, 10 years will not exist, because any policy that is that significantly flawed will eventually disappear. We don't always get it right, but we often do eventually. And so it is such a flawed policy. It is eroding local democracy. It is, and one of the, and so you've got not only members of councils who feel alienated that the majority rule, which is a bedrock principle of what we all believe democracy and decisions are made by. Majority rule. I mean,
you hope, yeah.
Right. And so when that isn't there, you get alienation, you get disenfranchisement. People feel, not just councillors, but chunks of communities who also feel like they're not only not being heard, but they're being overruled by a minority or by a single mayor. So that's problematic on that level. But the one that's often missed by people is, and maybe even more problematic, is that if anybody who's worked in municipal government, and often in government at any level, but municipal government in particular, they're familiar with the phrase that is without fear or favor. And that means you give professional advice as a planner or as a finance person or as an engineer, and you give your professional advice without fear or favor of what the politician thinks, because they need the facts. They need to know, I know you'd like to spend the money on that splash pad, but this bridge is going to fall down in the next 2 years. And I have to tell you that in public and on the record, because I'm a professional. When you start having the ability for one person to fire those people Many will stand their ground with integrity, but they're humans and they have kids in university and they're real people. And many, unfortunately, will start to say exactly whatever the mayor announced 2 weeks earlier on Facebook. And that becomes their professional opinion as opposed to what should be stated, which is, I can't recommend that you spend the money in that way because we don't have that much money in the reserves. It is highly problematic in terms of the professional advice base that politicians need to and should rely on to make good decisions. That is the underlooked and overwhelming problem with strong mayor powers. So, I was not given strong mayor powers. I would not have accepted them, although you can't reject them, but I would never have used them. I said this before, being a strong mayor is somebody who can listen, work with people, find compromises, and get to results where everybody feels like they were part of the process, even if they don't love the outcome. We have, I would argue, one of the most professional, calm, stable council environments there is in the province. I've never had a moment in 8 years of a councillor yelling, grandstanding, saying something personal about another councillor. Not one instance. That's because we respect each other, we listen to each other, I listen to them, they listen to me, and that extends to staff. And so that's the way it's meant to be done, that's the way it should be done. Yes, it takes a little longer sometimes. Is the idea that this could have been a shortcut to building housing quicker? Well, the Star and others have proven that that's not the case. So it will die on the vine eventually. And like that, I also think speed cameras will come back eventually. Something that is unequivocally the most effective safety speed mitigation tool ever, and proven through data to be the case, will eventually reemerge as well. So, these are unfortunate, policy changes that we live in what is becoming more and more common, not just here, but other places of populism driving agendas. But I think you'll see it come back around with time. But in the interim, it's a bit frustrating.
Yeah, it's
and Teresa, let me just say one last thing on this, and I've said it many times to people. I take huge pride in being a mayor and having a council and a town that runs in a nonpartisan fashion. I am here to work with anybody. I've gone and sat down with Doug Ford in person and talked to him about the issues or the various issues. And so this is not about me wanting to be, oppositional or difficult. I mean, the strong mayor powers were not given to me because we wouldn't sign a housing pledge of 1,200 units per year. Our typical year is 300. We can't build units anyway. I can't create that to happen. But even if I could, that would be an astronomical target. And then on top of all of that, we were waiting for 7 years for the province to sign off on the infrastructure, the wastewater pipes we needed to build homes. So we have run out of capacity to build. We couldn't do it from an engineering perspective if we wanted to. So am I going to sign this thing that's make-believe and mislead the public, developers and others? And so no, I'm not going to do that. And I didn't. And that's why it didn't occur. But not because I wanted to fight with Doug Ford, because it just wasn't grounded in reality. So anyway, I had to say that part too.
Well, I think it's interesting that you mentioned the tone of Newmarket Council because, this fall we're going to be looking at different communities around the province as we go into municipal elections. And there are some others, even in, York and Durham regions, where there are some really dysfunctional councils who, the treatment that people give to each other is just not something you would want in a professional setting at all. And when you talk about not being oppositional, it's something that's very core to me. I always think about when I'm trying to think of political decisions, it's always, well, do you want to feel right or do you want to be effective? Because sure, it's great to yell at someone else and that may make you feel good, but is that actually, producing the desired outcome that you're looking for? Because at the end of the day, when you're serving others, even when you're serving yourself, you should be more focused on what you're trying to achieve as opposed to trying, to feel good or vindicated or whatever throughout the process. And I think the tone that you're talking about is so crucial to some of the effectiveness you've had as a council.
Yeah, and I would say, so the question is, why is it happening? What can we do about it? And one of the things for sure, as a leader, as mayor, I try to set that tone all the time of respectful conversation, respectful tone. Others have done it before me. We've had help. We've had a very relatively. But so why is it happening? I mean, obviously everybody says right away social media, and that's absolutely true. That's part of the puzzle, without a doubt. It's really difficult. People are going on, non-elected people and sometimes elected people, and saying outrageous, aggressive, non-fact-based things all the time, almost daily. And it infiltrates the council chambers and the tone. The other one I would say is, and I'd be interested in your perspective on this with your background, and I don't know I've ever heard anybody explore this much, but traditionally, elected officials maybe were in municipal politics and then they migrated to provincial or federal. We still see that all the time. But we also see much more than ever before a migration of people from federal provincial back into municipal politics. Maybe they're disillusioned because, now at provincial and federal level, if you're a backbencher, you really don't really make decisions. You don't have a say in anything. And they're disillusioned and they want to come back to where they can actually have a voice and a vote. But what comes with that is not only have we seen the centralization of power at federal and provincial levels, and so therefore people feeling like they're not, and they're coming back to municipal, but we've also seen in that time, 20, 30, 40 years, in my opinion, a significant increase in partisanship at those levels. And the partisanship is kind of like getting very aggressive, nasty, and it's kind of like anything you say has to be wrong, and I'm going to find out, and I'm going to show. And so what we're seeing, I think, is the reimportation of the partisanship approach and the divisive approach in municipal politics, and it really concerns me. And I don't mean bringing partisanship, I don't mean bringing liberal and conservative NDP stuff into, but bringing that sense of I'm ready to fight.
Well, I wonder how much of that is the social media nature as well, because you do have a lot of this provincial federal politics of people who have run at those levels now coming back to municipal, and we've been seeing that for the last 20, 25 years. I like political history. I don't know enough about partisanship through the ages and then municipal politics to know if that was always something that happened. I think traditionally, until in recent decades, I think it was traditionally thought there are different levels of politics, and you start at municipal, you start at the school board level, and then you go to municipal, and then you make your way up to provincial or federal politics. And why would you go backwards? Because that's a failing. I don't think that's the case anymore. Also, I think a lot of politicians do fail at those levels and do end up going back to the municipal level. We've seen that a lot.
Yeah.
With various party leaders in the last 20 years of all stripes. But I do think that partisanship, I think it does give people a shorthand for, making their arguments and their judgments and all that stuff at different levels of politics. And they seem to miss that at the municipal level. So they go, oh, well, that person's just, a liberal or a conservative or a communist or whatever the language is that they want to use. And I think it really is driven by social media to bring that into the municipal level, which isn't to say there weren't, politicians who were very partisan in their tone, in previous iterations. Yeah. But I do think it is driven by that social media element. And something we didn't see previous that we have seen more recently is these community groups online, right? Like, so you'll have, I can't remember what the one is in Newmarket now, but there are a number of different community groups that spring up. There's one where I live in the local neighborhood I'm in. And, most of the time people are pretty nice on those. Sometimes they really get into it, and it's bringing partisanship to the municipal level at the voter level as well. It's not even just the politicians anymore. You have these online spaces where people just
and sometimes the partisan people coming to those are coming from outside of the community, even outside of the province.
Yeah.
And and it does land at the council table sometimes. So we've had various issues that way. But yeah, I'm openly, maybe it's just a sign I'm getting old and grumpy, but I worry about I worry about the future of local governance, of local democracy. Not only the eroding of it through some of these provincial measures, but even the divisiveness and the sort of willingness to fight as opposed to debate and discuss is becoming more prevalent. And so, and what I also think we're witnessing, and maybe I shouldn't say it that freely, but I said through all of this, whether it's social media, whether it's the divisiveness, whether it's other things going on, but I think we're seeing more and more people coming into municipal politics, maybe all levels of government, but municipal politics, for the wrong reasons, I guess, will be that blunt. Wanting to be important or wanting to rant and rave about partisan issues, or and we're seeing less people coming with that sort of sense of how can I do service and help my community be better, stronger, more inclusive, more equitable. And that worries me too, is that we're that's seen less and less, and maybe that's just me getting old and grumpy, but that's what I worry about these days.
Yeah, some technical difficulties on the video, but we're going to keep going in audio here. I do want to talk about transportation, because this is something that comes up at the municipal level a lot. Newmarket's a bit of a unique reality in that you've got the regional transportation network in there in terms of Viva and YRT, but then you also have Go Transit as well. And when I think about when I was still commuting from Newmarket, I would hop on the GO train, I'd get down to Union Station, go to work, come back. And we've been promised pretty much since then, in the last 15 years, that we're eventually going to have, all day two-way GO to Newmarket and beyond. And then, there was also the installation for a very long time, which my father will tell you he complained about the entire time, but the construction on Davis Drive and Yonge Street as well, of the Viva Rapid Busway network, which ended up not being completed at the same level throughout the route. Obviously, when it goes up towards the 404, is no longer a protected lane. I think that Newmarket has real potential as a regional tourism and transit hub. You've got these potential avenues here. What do you think needs to be done in terms of leveraging the local transit you already have, and also perhaps building with the future in mind in terms of keeping people moving as the population of the town grows?
Yeah, well, whether it's the town or province-wide or countrywide, probably, we know our transit's not where it should be, and compared to other jurisdictions. When you see transit excellence, when you're traveling, it's an impressive and thing to see, not only in how it moves people, but how it moves the economy. Hoping we can continue to move some of this forward. We've got funding applications in for expanding or completing the Viva work. Obviously, all day two-way GO is very important, and they're still, believe it or not, doing work in our town all the time and causing disruption. And we're all told it's about electrification, all day two-way GO. So but you cannot, even as mayor, get a timeline out of anybody that's even grounded. You won't get any timeline. So we don't really know what we're dealing with, but it looks like there's still work being done to some degree. But yeah, so I do think, when you combine all day two-way GO and Viva, there's a lot of opportunity there. The missing part, of course, is that the last mile that's often spoke about, and trying to find more creative ways. That's being filled in by more recently by e-devices, which are creating all kinds of challenges as well. And we need to figure that out as a province and as a municipality and as a region. But that's the other part, is our traditional transit is still limited, doesn't serve all neighborhoods in a timely manner terribly well, but the cost of doing that is immense. We already spend a significant amount of taxpayer dollars supporting. We don't even get 50% from fares, right? So, and that certainly would be a nice goal to have. We get just below 40%, I believe, from fares. So a lot of challenges there, but we know we have to keep moving forward. I had one creative idea a long time ago, and that was to give every time there's a new building, mid or high rise, built on a transit corridor, the all new residents should be given a 1-year free transit pass.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah, and then even if 20%, 10 to 20% of them stuck with it, that would increase ridership more than the way we're doing it right now. But we've got to get people on transit. In order to do that, it has to be, as we know, safe, reliable, and fast. And we're still working on all of those.
Well, and I would think that if there was a great pilot community for, suburban transit working, Newmarket, again, with its geographical side, would be the ideal site, because again, you don't have to go as far. There's not as many gaps in theory between stations and things like that. So ideally, this would be the place. Speaking to higher level government now, invest in the community, because I think there's a lot of opportunity there for proving that it can work. I do want to talk about placemaking in general, because I think this is an area where the community has changed a lot since I've grown up. I think you've talked about, the last 4 years being particularly active. When I look again at what a strong community looks like, there's an essential ingredient of that, of course, is building shared spaces for people to enjoy. And I think you've been doing a lot of work on that front in terms of various amenities, whether it's events, whether it's new parklands, whether it's, bringing, I'm sure you're going to talk about the AGO, but bringing, very high profile cultural institutions into the town. Newmarket is often boasted as one of Canada's 50 most livable communities. I know it's one of the safest communities in the country as well. What's been the story of your placemaking agenda, if you will, over the last few years, and what's it look like going forward?
Well, it's a topic I love to talk about. I mean, I'm passionate about placemaking. I ran 20 years ago and continue on the platform, which is that great communities and great cities are built around shared outdoor public spaces. And indoor, but I actually believe more in outdoor shared public spaces, and the value you get, the bang for your buck you get when you do that. And of course you have to activate them, and you have to create events and festivals and make things happen, and on a micro level or a macro level. But so placemaking can be done so many different ways, and there's our downtown Main Street is been voted best in Canada. It is one of the few that are thriving. Like it just gets better every single year. We have a boutique hotel. We've got many great restaurants, kinds of shops. It is buzzing with activity every weekend. You walk down and there's just people everywhere. Often because of festivals, we host the York Region Pride event. We have a Summerfest, that won Best Event Canada. And I could go on and brag about all the kind of stuff we're doing. We do viewing parties for all kinds of sporting events. We just did FIFA ones. And then so there's all those ways of placemaking. And then there's creating little breathing spaces on Davis along the Viva route where there's just really cool spaces to sit and get some shade and meet a friend from a building next to you. Those little ones, placemaking. We started a few years ago. I had an idea and I thought, let's make sure that people know when they get to Main Street, Newmarket, this is a place where things are happening. So now we pay every Friday and Saturday night 2 buskers to be on the street from 5 till 8 p.m. and play music, and they're not there to gather a crowd or an audience. They're there to just say, there's something going on here. There's a vibe. So there's so many ways to do it. And of course, the other one is public art. I'm passionate about it. That's a big focus for the next term. I want to really advance our public art program. And there's some fun ways to do that. And a big part of that is the Mulock Park that we're opening. And that is placemaking writ large. It's a 17-acre park. I think it'll set a new standard in the GTA. It's got a skating trail that's 350 meters long that goes into a forest and out of a forest. It's got many micro spaces and a glass house that was before a barn and outbuilding for an artist space and artist shows and residency. And of course, we've got the Mulock House itself, 11,000 square foot heritage house that'll have a cafe and balcony on the for dining. That'll have a library for working, meeting spaces, and then the entire upstairs will be the first time really that the AGO will be out of Toronto on a permanent basis. They do shows, of course, and they partner and they go places, but they'll be having rotating exhibits on a permanent basis in the upstairs of the Mulock House, and it'll be focused on Indigenous and Canadian art. So a lot of opportunities for placemaking, lots more to go. It is something that I think really is a differentiator between good communities and great communities.
What I think is most interesting about it is that you've managed to do this without taking away the heritage that people think about when they think of, Newmarket is a very heritage focused community, has been a long time, very important role in our national history as well. I like to talk about La Fontaine and Baldwin all the time and the community that sprung up around that. But also the other thing I think about is with Main Street, a lot of Main Streets that, get revived, it's because of gentrification and they maybe lose some of the heritage aspects that were there before, but even some of the businesses before. And I think about how, like my favorite Chinese food in the entire world is Four Seasons, and that's on Main Street and has been, since the 1980s. And every time I'm in Newmarket, I need to have Four Seasons. And I remember going there, walking home after high school, I would grab a couple chicken balls and things like that. And, those businesses are still there despite this new growth springing up around it. And I think that's an important part of the success of the placemaking Newmarket has seen.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just the Mulock house and property itself. I mean, we purchased that, and that was a big investment. And it would have, somehow otherwise been lost, I think. And the house would have somehow been preserved. But I've seen houses preserved in ways that really don't do them justice more times than not. But we've really preserved it and honored it. Downtown Main Street is a heritage conservation district. And there was a proposal, and it went to a vote of council, a split vote. This was 15 years ago, to put up a 10-story glass building right at the corner, right where the old post office is. And we didn't go that direction. There was a lot of grassroots resident involvement, and part of it was people saying, well, then nothing's going to happen there, and we said, well, patience, right? And so we waited, and now we have this incredible boutique hotel that honors the building, that has a rooftop patio that's the best in New York region, 50 rooms in our downtown. It couldn't have been a better outcome. But we stuck with our core belief in protecting the heritage on our downtown, and it's really worked out well.
Yeah, it's a really beautiful hotel as well, which I think it also brings a different flavor to the town that hadn't been there before. So that's part of it as well, is you're keeping that heritage, but you're also bringing something new that didn't exist previously, and not just duplicating it, which I think is incredibly important as you go forward and try to make a place that is both interesting to visit and also wonderful to live in.
Something to add here, if I can, is that so there's two other things we're doing that kind of work with a lot of our topics, but really with this topic of placemaking. And we're doing them as well. And I just think they're bold and ambitious, and which is part of our brand, but we're doing a rebranding. We've just completed it. It was a massive exercise, a huge amount of community involvement. Working with a company called MMGY Global that does city branding specifically. And I was going to these city branding conferences, and they were fascinating me. So the MMGY Global has done rebranding for like Chicago, Turks and Caicos, various places. And we rebranded ourselves and branded ourselves as a place. It's one of our lines is care to be bold, care to belong. And so we're doing a lot around caring, about being a caring community, a community that cares for one another, and a community that's bold in how it does it and how it moves forward. And so there's been a really lot of fun with the branding and our sort of different ways of projecting that branding. And we've partnered and we've open sourced the brand, by the way. And so we've got all kinds of 4, 5, 6, 8 businesses in town already employing the brand. There is a sort of a brand mark that comes with this called lowercase NMRKT period. And it's already on T-shirts and on brands all over the place. And then the other one that's really interesting, I think you'd find fascinating, is we're working with an organization called Shorefast. And this is a not-for-profit that's focused on place-based economies. So I call it sometimes a short form for people, hyper-local economic development, but it's more than shop local. It's a deeper strategy and philosophy that comes with that. And Shorefast, you might recognize the name, is founded by and still anchored by Zita Cobb. And Zita Cobb is, first of all, a great Canadian thinker, but and the founder of Shorefast, but also the person who established the Inn at Fogo Island and sort of helped to reinvent the economy at Fogo Island in a way that's place-based. And so we were one of the first 6 communities in Canada to be working with Shorefast for the last year on this, and there's going to be another 6 communities this year that come online, and so on and so forth, trying to sort of rethink local economic development and local economies across the country.
That's fantastic. I could talk about this stuff with you all day, because I know you didn't like the old branding as well, and I obviously am obsessed with branding myself. But I've already taken up so much time of yours today, so I do want to wrap up before I take up your entire day. But before we do, I do want to talk about the municipal election this fall. So again, local voters are going to the polls on October 26th to choose their next councils across the province. And we don't know yet if you will be opposed by anybody or not, but I'm sure you're entering this race assuming that might be the case. So as voters weigh their options, what's your elevator pitch to them about why they should give you another 4 years as mayor of Newmarket?
Well, I guess my elevator pitch would be, start with look at the last 4 years or look at the last 8 years. I would say the last 4 to 8 years, and the last 4 in particular, have been the busiest, most ambitious in the history of Newmarket. We've done this rebranding. We're working with Shorefast and economic development. We've built out the Mulock Park, the largest project in the history of Newmarket. We've introduced new events and festivals on Main Street, helping to revitalize Main Street, the Summerfest, Ice Lounge, one Best Festival of Events Ontario 3 of the last 4 years, one Best Event Canada. And we're building affordable housing and a shelter and transitional housing spaces, more than our share on a per capita basis compared to other communities. And again, I go back to the point we talked about earlier, and we're doing that. We've not to mention we've sold and repositioned our utility for the future in a way that's financially advantageous and will ensure that we have the infrastructure that we need. All of this stuff in the last 4 years, and I'm forgetting many things. And we did that while reducing debt, increasing reserves, and keeping our taxes well below the GTA average. To me, I think that's what build an amazing community, be ambitious, move forward, but do it in a fiscally responsible manner. We're doing that, and I think everybody has a track record to look at, whether it's for me or for this council, and for all the community partners that do this with us. And I'm positive we can do this for another 4 or 8 years, and there's a lot of exciting things yet to tackle. And there's some tough challenges too, and we got to face those and work at those as well.
There you go. I think you've summed up perhaps a sub brand name, which is Newmarket, something for everyone.
That's right.
I was gonna say thank you so much for giving me so much time today. This was really great to chat about, because I think Newmarket's not a small town, but it's also not a giant city as well. And there's some unique challenges and opportunities that it faces that a lot of communities across the country face that are of similar size. So it's always nice for folks to get to learn more about a community of your size and see what's working and what we can be doing more of.
Well, thank you very much. It was a great conversation, and it's always good for a person like a mayor to stop and have these conversations and pull your mind up out of the day to day and think about the high level and the bigger picture and the long term. And so I appreciate it.
I appreciate it as well. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thanks.
You've been listening to Progress Canada, presented by Lightbulb Narrative, a Canadian-owned company specializing in strategic communications, narrative development, and content creation. Our music today was composed by Elliot Middleton. If you enjoyed today's episode, please consider subscribing to access future episodes the moment they drop. Thanks for listening.